When your family leaves you behind. My story of pain, anger, and overcoming. I never thought I'd have the courage to tell this, but the time has come. For a long time I carried this anger and shame in silence, thinking it was just another family problem. I grew up believing I was the one in the wrong, that if my parents gave more to my siblings, it was because I didn't deserve it. I saw Jonas getting a brand new car at 18, Raquel getting a paid exchange program in Europe, and even Anna, the youngest, having everything of the best. Meanwhile, I rode crowded buses to college and still moonlighted as a waiter in the wee hours of the morning to pay for rent and food. I was always told, you need to learn how to get by. I did, but at the cost of debt and a shattered mental health. The worst part was the feeling of invisibility. I was there, under the same roof, in the same blood, but it felt like I had no value. Every family gathering was a reminder that I was the loser. This difference eroded my self-esteem to the point where I thought my life would never change. The day the trigger came years later, but it started with that feeling that I was alone, even surrounded by people. I remember exactly the day I realized I couldn't do it anymore. It was a Sunday afternoon, a family lunch, at that lavish table I could almost never afford on my own. My father, Luis, bragging about having paid for Raquel's second car. My mother, Jacqueline, talking about Anna's birthday party, which would cost over 20,000. And there I was, eating quietly, knowing I owed rent and was behind on my electricity bill. I tried to hide in silence, but my brother blurted out, "Lucas, you should work more. Relying on odd jobs doesn't give you a future." That cut through me like a knife. They never asked if I needed help, never cared about my difficulties. They only demanded and compared. That was the day anger turned to courage. I pounded the table, trembling, and spilled everything I'd kept. Bottled up for years. I told them about the debts, the loneliness, how much it hurt to see that my parents only loved the children they could show off to others. No one expected that. The silence was heavy. I almost vomited with nerves, but it was the first time I felt alive. After that day, things didn't change immediately. My mother cried, my father was angry, my brothers told me I was overreacting, but something inside me shifted. I realized I couldn't expect them to give me what they never wanted to give. I needed to build my life so I would never again depend on that conditional love. I started working 2 jobs, sleeping little, but every bill paid was a victory. It wasn't easy. I often felt like crap. While my brothers traveled, I was exhausted, but little by little I began to gain a strength I didn't even know I had. I'd look in the mirror and see someone who was surviving, and that gave me more energy. I won't lie. I cried a lot alone. I thought I couldn't handle it. But I learned to silence the voices that told me I was less than. The real turning point came years later, when my father lost his job and everything fell apart for them. The day my father lost his job was strange. I no longer lived with them, but I received a crying call from my mother saying how dire the situation was. They'd always had easy money. They'd never known how to live on a shoestring. My siblings, accustomed to having everything, were desperate. Raquel was in debt, Jonas had a car and apartment loan. Anna couldn't even shop. I listened to this with a mixture of anger and compassion. I knew what it was like to have nothing. They didn't. In that moment, everything I'd been through came flooding back. The humiliations, the comparisons, the sleepless nights. I had 2 options: ignore them and let them fall apart, or help somehow. The hurt part of me wanted to disappear and say, get on with it. But the part that grew up in suffering knew I didn't want to be like them. I decided to help, but in my own way, without sacrificing myself again. I called them all to talk, all of them, at the same table that once made me feel invisible. This time, I was the one speaking, calmly but firmly. I said I would help, but not with money. I would show them how to live within their means, as I had learned the hard way. I taught them to cut expenses, to sell what they didn't need, to look for work without fuss. At first they resisted, cried, and fought. But gradually they understood. It was strange to see my brothers going to work doing simple things, to see my parents selling their cars to pay the bills. But it was also liberating. I felt that, finally, they were experiencing what I had experienced. Not out of revenge, but because only by going through pain can we understand the value of things. And there I knew for sure, everything I had suffered was not in vain. After that first conversation, I realized my life had changed from the inside out. It wasn't immediate, but I began to feel a clarity I hadn't felt before. I worked more focused, organized my finances, and created small goals that gave me some control over the chaos my life had been. Every penny paid, every bill paid off, brought me a sense of victory no one could ever take away. Meanwhile, my siblings and parents began to feel the real impact of no longer having easy money. Jonas had to sell the car he always complained about. Raquel moved to a smaller apartment, and Anna had to suspend her courses. Abroad, seeing my siblings facing the hardships I'd endured for years made me realize something. Their pain was a form of learning, and I no longer needed to carry anger, but compassion. It was a strange feeling. I could feel the injustice of the past, but at the same time, I recognized that everyone was learning the real price of life, and I had already been through it and survived. As much as my family hurt me, I chose not to be defined by anger or resentment. I wanted my brothers to learn, but I didn't want to be cruel. The feeling of seeing each of them handle themselves for the first time was strange, a mixture of pride and relief. One day, my mother called me crying, asking for financial help. My first reaction was anger. I remembered years of neglect, the times I'd tried to reach out and they'd ignored me, the constant comparisons with my siblings. But deep down, I knew I'd grown beyond that. It wasn't about them hurting me anymore. It was about me deciding what to do in the situation. I took a deep breath and thought, I can help, but in my own way. It wouldn't be an easy check to cover luxuries or ostentation, but a bridge to teach responsibility. I called them back and set clear boundaries. I'll help pay essential bills, but you need to learn how to manage, sell, and cut back on excess. That provoked resistance, tears, and arguments. But I didn't give in. For the first time, my voice had power over my life and how I would deal with the pain they'd caused me. Over the next few months, I closely followed every step they took to rebuild their lives. Jonas started working jobs he'd previously despised. Raquel began organizing her budget. Anna had to adapt to simpler courses and experiences. I felt like a silent mentor, observing and guiding, but without making decisions for them. It was strange to feel compassion for someone who had once made me feel inferior, but at the same time, liberating. Each small achievement, however belated, reminded me of how much I had learned and grown from my own struggle. What had once been anger became a sense of inner empowerment. I had survived and learned, and now I could help without losing my autonomy. During this period, I began to appreciate small achievements that would previously have gone unnoticed. Buying something simple, like a piece of clothing or paying off a bill, brought more satisfaction than any luxury my brothers had ever had. It was the taste of independence, of victory earned through hard work and sweat, not favoritism or easy money. For the first time, I felt genuine pride in myself, not through the approval of others. I had survived invisibility, constant comparison, and silent humiliation, and was living a life of my own making. What began as a lunch filled with anger and frustration turned into a process of rebuilding and learning. I realized I didn't need to expect love or justice from my family to succeed or be happy. Every step I took alone, every difficulty I faced, prepared me to deal with their crisis without losing my emotional balance. Today, I see that true overcoming isn't just financial, but emotional. learning to value yourself, setting limits, and finding strength in your own ability to survive. I discovered that life taught me hard lessons, but that I could use them to grow, regardless of who was by my side. Over time, I realized that the biggest challenge wasn't just financial, but emotional. For years, I carried within me a mixture of shame, anger, and sadness. My brothers had everything effortlessly, while I struggled to get by. Now, watching them face hardship, I felt a strange mix of compassion and liberation. It wasn't revenge, but life, finally balancing what was once unequal. Every step they took toward recovery reminded me of how much I had learned. I, who had once cried myself to sleep because I couldn't afford to pay a bill, who had felt the bitter taste of silent rejection from my own family, was now in a position of strength. Being able to help without submitting myself again was one of the most liberating moments of my life. I learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. I also began to see my own achievements differently. Before, any small victory seemed insignificant because it was invisible compared to my siblings' luxury. Now, every bill paid, every savings made, every effort recognized by myself carried enormous weight. I had built a solid yet simple life based on effort, work, and real learning. I no longer depended on family approval to feel complete. This gave me a clarity I'd never had before. My happiness and success don't depend on the inequality or favoritism I've experienced, but on what I do with the tools I have. I became my own pillar, my own support, and this gave me more strength than any outside help could. Seeing my brothers facing hardships brought up complex feelings. It was strange to feel empathy for people who had ignored me for years, but at the same time it was necessary. They had finally learned the value of effort and responsibility. I could guide them, show them the way, but it wasn't my responsibility to carry their lives. This distinction gave me peace. I realized that part of overcoming adversity is learning to separate our own story from the failures and privileges of others. I no longer needed to suffer for what they had or hadn't done. I had my own story of struggle and triumph, and that was enough to make me feel whole. My self-esteem began to rebuild gradually and solidly. Each conscious decision, each choice not to submit again, each step toward financial and emotional independence strengthened me. I realized that true strength lies not in money, ostentation, or the approval of others, but in persisting when no one believes in it, in rising when you're alone, and in making difficult decisions for yourself. I learned that overcoming obstacles isn't linear. It hurts, it weeps, it's tiring, but that victory is sweeter when earned through one's own sweat. Looking back today, I see that all the challenges I faced shaped who I am. I not only survived, but I learned to appreciate every small achievement, to respect myself, and to set healthy boundaries. I still feel scars. It still hurts to remember certain humiliations, but I transformed these pains into learning experiences. I understood that being invisible doesn't define who you are, and that true overcoming comes from within, from the courage to face challenges, the resilience to rebuild yourself, and the clarity that our worth doesn't depend on the opinions of others. In the following months, my life continued to be a process of learning and rebuilding. I began to appreciate small moments, like having a leisurely coffee, paying a bill without a pang, or simply feeling in control of my own routine. Each achievement, no matter how small, represented my independence and proof that I could survive without relying on my family's approval or support. Seeing my siblings and parents face their own difficulties also showed me that I no longer needed to carry resentment. What once consumed me now served as a reference point to keep me going. I realized that overcoming adversity isn't just about money or status, but about learning to value yourself, even when no one else sees it. This brought me a sense of freedom I'd never felt before. I was building a solid life based on effort, discipline, and awareness, and each step made me stronger. I also learned that helping doesn't mean sacrificing to the point of losing yourself. When I decided to guide my family through the financial crisis, I established clear boundaries. I could teach, support, and show them the way, but I couldn't take on their mistakes as my own. This clarity gave me a confidence I never imagined I had. Seeing my siblings working to pay their bills, handling responsibilities that were previously superfluous, was strange, but also rewarding. I could feel that my painful experience hadn't been in vain. Instead of anger, I felt empathy, and this helped me better deal with the old feelings I still carried. My relationship with my parents has changed. It's not perfect, and perhaps never will be, but it has become respectful. I've learned to set boundaries without fear of hurting others. I've learned to say no when necessary, and that's liberating. The difference between then and now is enormous. Before, I felt small, invisible, and worthless. Today, even when they don't recognize my achievements, I know my own worth. I've discovered that other people's approval is secondary, and that true strength lies in relying on your own choices and achievements. I also started taking better care of myself emotionally. Therapy, exercise, and small self-care habits became essential. Before, I ignored my mental health, focusing only on work and survival. Now, I know that to overcome the pain of the past and not be consumed by it, I need to invest in myself. Every positive habit, every conscious decision keeps me on the path to emotional stability. Understanding that I can be my own support was one of the greatest lessons I learned. Today, I see that true overcoming isn't about erasing pain, but learning from it. I still feel scars, but they no longer define me. The experience of being invisible in my own family, of fighting alone against adversity, taught me resilience, patience, and inner strength. I no longer need anyone's validation to feel my life has value. I've learned to recognize and respect myself, and that's an achievement no one can take away. Today, my brothers work and pay their own bills. They still complain sometimes because they never knew how to handle limitations or responsibilities before. But that doesn't affect me anymore. Everyone has their own story, and mine was written through my own effort and learning. I no longer needed to prove anything to them or to my parents. The pride I feel today doesn't come from comparison, but from the knowledge that I survived all of this and managed to build a solid, honest life. It's strange to think that years of pain and invisibility brought me strength I didn't even know existed. Today, I can look back and feel gratitude for having gone through it all, even if the pain still leaves its mark. If I could go back to that Sunday lunch, I would do it all over again. The outburst of anger, the silent scream I let out within myself, it was all necessary for me to begin to value myself. That moment gave me the courage to set limits, to refuse to accept less, to fight for myself. It was the turning point that led me to build an independent life and develop the emotional strength I carry today. There are no regrets, because every tear and every suffering shaped me. I learned that sometimes we need to stand firm for the world to see our worth, even when our own family doesn't. Many people believe that family is untouchable, that we should accept everything in silence. I learned that this isn't the case. Family also makes mistakes, hurts, and fails, and it's okay to set boundaries and protect yourself emotionally. It's not about cutting ties, but about preserving yourself and ensuring that your life and feelings are valued. Self-respect comes before the approval of others. This was one of the most difficult and liberating lessons life has taught me. I still have much to achieve, and life remains challenging. But today, I know I can face any obstacle because I've already survived what seemed insurmountable. I've learned to trust myself, to support my choices, and to value my own achievements. I no longer need to compete or compare myself to my siblings. My self-esteem is intact, built on effort, resilience, and real learning. Every step I take is my own, and this gives me a sense of freedom I never imagined I had. This is my story. I'm Lucas, I'm 29 years old, and I was the invisible son for a long time. Today, I'm someone who has built my own life, who values myself, and who has found strength even in the cruelest situations. I won't lie, I still feel pain and have scars, but they no longer define me. I survived, I grew, and I learned that true overcoming comes from within, from daily effort, clarity, and the courage to refuse to submit to injustice. For those reading this, remember, you can turn things around even when it seems impossible.